Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining Sushi Tech Tokyo 2026. Our next session will be about Crossroads in the age of AI and deep tech, betting on the next decade. Please welcome our speakers. Yuki Shirato, Techstars. Jingo Kikukawa, Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry. Guido Appenzeller, Andreessen Horowitz. Junji Takaoka, University of Tokyo Innovation Platform. Please welcome our speakers with a round of applause. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much for coming, everyone. This is one of the last sessions, and Prime Minister Takaichi was here with a huge crowd, but I'm very happy and honored to host distinguished panelists today to discuss the deep tech and physical AI today. So let me start the self-introduction by each of the panelists. So let me start first. So I'm Yuki Shirato. I'm currently the Managing Director of Techstars Tokyo, which is supported by Tokyo Metropolitan Government, METI, and JETRO, and Cabinet Office, as well as Mitsui Fudosan, who has a booth here today. And then I'm also a venture partner of Appenzeller Ventures, as well as Silicon Foundry. So Jingo-san, please.
Thank you, Shirato-san. As good afternoon, and I'm very honored to be here. And then, I'm Jingo, as I'm Director General for the Innovation Policy at the METI, Japanese government. So I was being involved to making the policies about how to enhance the startups' businesses, not only businesses, but also the culture itself. So I'm really looking forward to having today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Guido?
Guido Appenzeller. I'm investment partner at Andreessen Horowitz. We're a venture capital firm. Before that, CTO at Intel for the data center division, CTO at VMware, and started 2 companies.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Junji, incubation partner at University of Tokyo IPC, which is on University of Tokyo's venture capital arm. And I'm in charge of startup creation and venture creation. Before that, I was a serial entrepreneur. I sold 2 companies, and I'm here too. I'm excited to be here this time.
Great, thank you very much. So I broke this session into 4 parts, and each has its own theme, but closely related to each other. So let me start with sort of a shift from pure software to hardware. So software has been the focus of Silicon Valley or the global venture capital for a long time, and A16Z, Mark Andreessen himself coined the term software is eating the world in 2011. So, but I feel there has been a little bit of shift towards AI integrated into physical world in defense, energy, and dual use, which we will get to later. And then I was actually stopping by some booth on the physical AI and robotics and whatnot, and I've seen some interesting progress there. So I'd like to ask each of you a question on this topic. So start with Guido. As I mentioned, A16Z has been the champion of software investment, but you did study robotics, and then you are passionate about hardware and the physical AI space as well. So have you seen some shift or more enthusiasm among the Silicon Valley VCs into physical AI or deep tech or hardware manufacturing space?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, today, we are very software-centric VC, so about 90% of the companies we're funding are pure software companies. And in general, from a venture perspective, software is very attractive because it traditionally requires very little investment, and you can scale companies very, very quickly, right? That said, we have seen over the last 24 months or so some pretty big exits around chips, like microchips. There have been some AI accelerators, that suddenly got a lot of attention. There's definitely a lot happening in robotics right now. So that's it's a very, very active area. In robotics, we're not seeing as many production deployments as we like, but there's a lot of investment going on. So we're still, waiting for that last bit. But I think it's very promising. But for all of these things, for robots or chips, software is still very, very important, right? NVIDIA's dominance to a large degree is because of the moat they built with their software drivers, right? For robotics, there are companies that just build models, whether it's a good idea or not is a question, but the software is definitely very, very important. So I wouldn't look at this as software or hardware. I would more look at it as building hybrid systems that combine both.
Thank you. So Junji, Japan has world-class academia, top talent, deep tech, manufacturing base, and all that. And then you are the incubation partner at UTokyo IPC, which is the university-originated venture capital. So how do you see the shift or trend?
Yeah, so like 10 years back, or maybe 20 years back, no one from University of Tokyo actually started business. Yes, only a handful. And I think the business that was popular at the time was pure software, but not really in a sense today. People are now into algorithm or AI, which require some special knowledge. So over the 10 years, we have seen more and more startups coming from academia world, not from bachelors, PhD guys, and young professors. So in that sense, the players or entrepreneurs, backgrounds are slightly, changing. And speaking about robotics and hardware, or maybe biotech and all these things, you can't just, hit up on an idea and start businesses. You have to be pretty familiar with, what you're doing in order to build a product. So in that sense, we have seen dramatic change actually in Japan as well over the product that they are developing. So it's not just about commercialization of the patented technologies, but academia is a kind of a good environment for entrepreneurs to come out.
Thank you. So Jingo-san, last but not least, the METI is supporting the deep tech manufacturing, and it covers all sorts of enterprises here. But what do you particularly support the startups in this space?
Well, before talking about the policy supporting the how to support the startups in this area, but I think Japan has been very good at the manufacturing industry, like automobiles, of course, the robotics as well, and the semiconductors as well. So I think is well, of course, the part of the software, we are unfortunately have a little bit behind such kind of competition, but now so our era is coming. We're gonna like to combine software. Well, as Guido said, the software and hardware. We have to, the mix up those two aspects. And well, as the Harvard University research, Japan has been number one country about complexity manufacturing abilities. So I think we still, in this country, we still have the potential to manufacture and make very, very complicated products. So I think it is software define the hardware as before, but now I think maybe hardware itself can define somehow software. So that means that both way, software and hardware, both ways I think it's very important at this moment. So in that point of view, METI launched the kind of program about AI and physical AI, and then so we like to make kind of the foundation model for AI, physical AI, and then to collect the data, physical data, And also, as we are going to set up some kind of use cases about how to use AI for the manufacturing lines. So it's those the policies that we are now pushing on.
Great, thank you. I think that's a good segue to the second section of this session. The rise of geopolitics is apparent now. The governments around the world are not just regulators anymore, and then they're also giving out grants and subsidies. In Japan, case NIDO and then JETRO and whatnot. But also they are becoming the investors or customers, right? I just look at the data, and Anduril, which started in 2017, received in March last month up to $20 billion worth of federal contracts for next 10 years, right? And Helsing from Germany, your country, has heavily backed the European governments and received a $269 million contract, right? Both are working in both hardware and software, mostly defense tech and dual-use technologies, right? So, Jingo-san. So in the U.S., companies like Palantir and Anduril and SpaceX even grew largely because of the government contracts and subsidies and incentives. So in Japan, what kind of policies or how do you see the rise of the government's initiatives or role in scaling up and helping the startups?
Well, thank you very much for asking such kind of question. I think it's compared to the software-based oriented startups. I think it's maybe, let me say, the hot, deep tech startups. I think that's those deep tech startups oriented is a very, technology-oriented startups. So that means they should take a little bit longer time to, getting, growth. So I think in that sense, I think we should support somehow. And so one of the things is we are now thinking about maybe the government should be the first client for the startups. I mean, this spaces, computing. Why don't the government itself, purchase their service or product? So I think is in U.S. They are the very good program of DARPA. The defense tech is the government itself. They are they are big client for the startups. So in that sense, actually the Japanese government about procurement, we have the around $100 billion US for the general procurement. Well, I think except the defense industry, but so I think those kind of the procurement budget should go to, the to purchase their service and products from startups. I think that is the one thing is that we can do it for those deep tech startups.
That's very encouraging for Japanese startups in this space. So Guido, A16Z has American Dynamism, which is a different fund from yours, but their focus is like aerospace, defense, energy, and industrial as well. So how much does geopolitics affect your investment decisions, as a whole, not just your fund? And how do you see the role of the governments from the VC's perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. So to flesh this out a little bit, we have different funds, as you mentioned it, at Andreessen Horowitz. I'm part of the infrastructure team. When we think about investments, usually we worry very little about geopolitics. There's certain countries where we can't invest, there's government rules for that. But outside of that, if we see a company and we think this might be the next, great technology leader, we want to invest, right? And the geopolitics are really only a secondary consideration. Our American Dynamism team was specifically created to look at investments that have a geopolitical angle, right? And they've been very successful. They invested in some great companies. I think in the United States, there was a realization that there was a bit of a disconnect between Silicon Valley and the government sector, and where the government didn't know how to buy from startups, and startups didn't understand how to build for the government. And so this idea of saying we can create a specialized group of investors that keep relationships with Washington, D.C., that understand the decision makers, that understand what they're looking for, and then help bridge that gap. That's a very, very powerful idea. We have, I think Palantir was the first success story. We've since Underhill, another one. We had a number of companies that I think have done this very well. And we continue to do this. I'll actually be, in 2 weeks, I'll be in Washington, D.C., because we're showing a number of AI companies to the government. So I think this cooperation between startups and investors and the government can be very, very successful.
Thank you. So Junji, your VC generally invest in deep tech and then try to help them scale up and whatnot. So how do you see the role of the government, and then also how the geopolitics, especially from Japan's VC's perspective, affect your decisions or perspectives or investments?
Yes. So first of all, universities are universities. We always talk about the role of universities, but we always talk about what is not the role of universities. So in terms of dual use or defense, it's kind of beyond the scope of the role of universities. Yet, I see more and more entrepreneurs, younger generations showing interest in, going into the space as well. So, and we're encouraging them, to seek what they pursue. And the idea behind that is, where there's a market, there's a startup. There's a startup. Apparently, Japanese entrepreneurs, Japanese manufacturing companies are getting pretty good attention from other countries. So that's truth. And definitely we should take advantage of that opportunity. We should seize that chance. So in that sense, whether it is dual use or defense or whatever that is, we've seen kind of recent dramatic changes of attention toward Japan. So in that sense, we are pretty positive about helping those entrepreneurs seize those opportunities. And related to the government role, of course, University of Tokyo has been working closely with METI and Minister of Education and everyone in the government. And every time I talk with someone from outside Japan, they say the government is amazing. The government in Japan is amazing. They're pretty positive. They take so many actions. There's no country like Japan, that where actually the government is really active in this startup ecosystem. So yes, again, we can definitely take that opportunity and take advantage of that opportunity as well. And the government is often the gateway to the overseas investment as well. So yeah, I'm pretty positive about all these changes, recent changes.
Can I? Well, Jun, thank you very much. You talk too much about how good. But well, I think Guido-san is point out a very significantly important point. How to fill the gap between the government and startups, because client and providers is always there's a big gap between those two. And then so, for instance, METI is now, well, actually last year we launched the kind of the test bed for quantum computer in Tsukuba, one hour the train from Tokyo. And so that is a very globally as a great test bed for quantum computing. So we actually purchased a couple different type of quantum computing. So one of them are coming from American startups, and one of them is coming from Tokyo University-oriented startups, and one is coming from the big Japanese traditional company. And so those kind of mix up, then we communicate very in detail how to build up the test bed for quantum computing, and then so it took very long time about such kind of discussion with the startups. But I think it's with our side, the government as a client, we have learned a lot of things from startups. What they need, So I think that kind of step is we need.
Yeah, a good point. Thank you. So the third topic I prepared was deep tech, and then we were just chatting backstage what the deep tech actually is, and then because it's not widely used in Silicon Valley, but it's quite commonly used in Japan, and then to some extent Europe. But I think that here in deep tech, more of the physical AI, so the combination of hardware and software, as you've been talking now, and yeah, so I think that significant difference between sort of a pure SaaS play or software play and then deep tech and hardware software combo space is the cycle. It takes much longer to scale up because you need the lab and the research upfront, and it takes time, and then a lot of brains and a lot of top talent, right? So on that topic, I will start with Junji. The Japanese universities are constantly ranked the top universities among the top universities in the world, but still there are not many, if a few, research based like startups scaled up to a global level. So how do you see this trend, and what is actually missing? From your perspective, is like a top talent, or the founder spirit, or the grants, or money, or anything that you see, or any other insights from your perspective?
Yes, I think I'll try to make it short, but there are many ways of exit, many of it ways of successes. Yes, there's a unicorn type of success, but there's the success of M&A type of success. There are so many different types of successes. But I think one thing is certain about the startups in Japan, which is the team or the business domain or are pretty domestic and not diversified. And the mentor community or the partner community is pretty limited, in Japan. That has actually, not really helped them, go global. So now this year, last year, have seen dramatic changes of, USVC, just like A16Z or accelerator programs in the US or in UK. So those are, and Techstars, of course, are flowing into Japan. So I think what is missing and what is kind of fulfilling right now is a global, diversified community of supporters for startups.
Interesting. So Guido, I'd like to ask, so A16Z recently made the first investment in a Japanese founder startup, which is not necessarily hardware, it's more AI companion space. But do you see investing in a Japan originated or Japanese founders hardware, software combo, physical AI startup for us? And then if so, what do you see amongst Japanese startups in Japan or the Japanese founders in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I mean, so we're super interested in the Japanese market. We made our first investment. We have announced one investment, to be precise, and I expect there to be more. At the end of the day, we invest in startups globally. If we find an interesting company, no matter where it is, we think this can be potential market leader in their space. We're happy to do whatever work it takes in that particular country to make it happen. We as investors kind of have we're in an easy spot where we don't have to think about in a particular country what is strong or not so strong, because we can just go there and look at the companies and compare them, and we measure them globally, and if they're good, they're good. If they're bad, they're bad, right? It's very simple. if I was an entrepreneur in Japan, I think I said that in the last panel, I wouldn't think about primarily what is Japan strong at. If you have something that you have a passion about, if you have something that you're good at, right? If you have a good team and you want to pursue that, I would go for it. And if theoretically your country is bad at it, who cares? Just give it a shot. We are certainly seeing in certain areas concentrations of startups in Japan, right? Robotics is one of them. I lived in Japan for 1 year in 1997 doing robotics research at the University of Tokyo, and so it's great to see that robotics research is still very strong here. There's some, I think, unique opportunities around robotics in Japan. So one is, I think the first big use case for this next generation of robots that use modern models will probably be in the manufacturing sector, is my impression. And United States does not have a lot of manufacturing. Japan has a lot of very, very good manufacturing. So that's a very, very attractive sort of starting market for these companies, right? It really helps if you can develop a robot together with the use case next door, right? In Silicon Valley, there's almost no manufacturing, so they at least have to go to the other side of the United States to find a good use case. I think another strength is that Japan has a lot of expertise in manufacturing the parts that go into these robots, and that helps in two ways. One is, in my experience, the closest proxy we have to robots is probably that's a large industry. It's probably self-driving cars, right? They have also complex mechanics plus complex software, and all of these companies were built in a vertically integrated way that basically hardware and software were developed together. So having your manufacturing close by, I think, is very, very beneficial because you can basically go back and modify it and have faster cycles. And then the last thing is, in United States, there's more and more of a desire, specifically in the defense and government sector, but also in general, to decouple from the Chinese supply chains, right? And I think that helps Japan because it's one of the most viable alternatives. So for all of those reasons, I think robotics is a very, very promising area. And not the only one, but would be my number one.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I have to point out that's the privilege of being an A16Z. Everyone wants to get investment from you. So you get to see a lot of startups in every industry from every country. So Jingo-san, so the governments that we are talking about, the role of the governments and the government's regulations could accelerate or even break the certain startups, right? And then METI has been supporting large enterprises historically, but also now startups. So what kind of policies or initiatives are you thinking or you are implementing now to scale up AI-driven manufacturing or more startup and then large enterprise collaboration?
Well, it's very big questions, but I think it's the first. I think the physical AI is if talking about the physical AI, so we need to how to deal with the data issue. So I think that is one significantly important things: how to share the data and how to deal with the data. So I think and that data issue, I think we should discuss about much with the startups. But not only startups, but also our like-minded countries, like our friend the U.S. So how to exchange the data as those kind of things. That is, I think, first point. And also, I think Guido-san is point out a very good point. Is we should think about I am working for the Japanese government. So that's why I have to care about Japanese startups. But I think I do not want to limit to the Japanese startups because we have a lot of the talent here. So those talents is, many talents, go to US to launch their business. And then they are, coming back to Japan somehow. And then they are, one of the startups which we support. They launch their business in the United States, but they would like to establish an R&D branch in Japan. So in that case, we really put a lot of support to them. And well, as I mentioned previously, the test bed, quantum computing test bed, we purchase not only, from not only Japanese startups but U.S. startups. Why? Because they are, there's quantum computer is one of the best in the world. That's why. So, a couple weeks ago, I met the American VCs, and then they said they really put their interest in Japanese market, but they don't care about the nationalities. They just focus on the technology and the talent. So, but in that point of view, well, they said a little bit, well, Japanese startups sometimes a little bit less ambition. So, in that point of view, I think JETRO and METI is having a very good program to send our talent to, the global market. So, as always, I always saying is go global and born global. So I think those points is we really help out to such kind of startups, I think.
Can I add a quick thing? In some way, I graduated from Stanford, and you have many people starting companies. And often you have 2 undergrad students. They're saying, we want to start a company, and we want to be the world leader in something. And it's kind of a crazy statement, right? They haven't even started building the product yet, and they still think about world leadership. But 2 observations. One is it sometimes works, like if you're Google or so, right? They're sort of a global company now. But more importantly, I think if you don't start with that idea, it will definitely not work, right? You have to go in with the idea we're building a global company, we're building a world leader in order to ever get there. So,
very good discussion. So the last topic I had for the session is dual use, which is obviously a sensitive topic, but I think it is becoming more and more important. Japan officially abandoned or lifted the ban on the weapon exports as the government. And also dual use generally solves national critical problems, so they scale up really quickly. I mentioned the examples of Anduril and whatnot. So it is a very important a topic I think we'd like to touch upon. So I will start with Jingo-san as the Japanese government's policymaker. So Japan has historically been cautious about dual use. I think that's just a matter of fact. But now the government's the policy changes and whatnot, and then economic security is an important topic for any government, not just Japanese government. So how do you see the rise of dual use technologies, in Japan, not just for startups, for Japanese industries? If you have any opinions or insights. Sorry, this is a very sensitive political subject, but.
Shirato-san is always asking me the very difficult question as well, a little bit confidential issue, but as much as I can, I like to convey this kind of message to the audience. As as Shirato-san mentioned, is that the abandon the export restriction about the defense equipment, but of course, that is one of the very significant is kind of signal. But that is not the issue. As Prime Minister Takaichi came here and sent very very positive message to our talent here, and then so the same Prime Minister Takaichi-san also set up the working group about defense industry. So because defense industry is a very, very, becoming a very important industrial sector for Japan. So Prime Minister Takaichi assigned 2 ministers for that working group. First is, of course, Minister of Defense, but also METI Minister also assigned So those two ministers jointly establish our, the next plan, how to strengthen our defense industry. So that means we need to get the not only defense market, but also the other not defense industry also is we need. For instance, talking about drone. Of course, drone can be used for the defense purpose, but also as 2 years ago, I went to Noto Peninsula, Noto Island, which got the big earthquake happen. At that time, I controlled the drone to convey the medical equipment to the place that happened and the earthquake happened. So, all such kind of the deep tech and cutting edge technology is always using for such kind of dual use. So that's why the Prime Minister Takaichi assigned the two ministers. So, the government is thinking not only defense market, but non-defense market also. So, in that point of view, space, quantum, the drone and water drone, and those kind of things as our, of course, the target because of the dual use tech.
That's a very good point, and then thanks for sharing with us. So, Junji, so many breakthroughs coming out of University of Tokyo or any other top universities of Tokyo. Where the specific hurdles for academic, like a research, minded founders to overcome, to, for example, again, a dual use or industrial robots or space, those can be used for many purposes, not just for defense, but economic or other purposes. So from your perspective, talking with lots of research-minded founders at university, how do you see how do you see it?
Yes. So again, universities and the startups are different. People are always talking about universities interchangeably, and university-based startups. Startups are startups. Startups just come out of universities. So in that sense, a startup can, work independently on, what they pursue. So university standard point of view is, working on research. And if entrepreneurs want to, use technology out of the universities and maybe, the entrepreneurs from university college students, if they want to start businesses around the defense, then that's okay. Universities and startups are kind of independent of each other. So that's kind of the stance universities are taking right now. And as for defense, more and more younger generations are showing interest in that. But again, where there's a demand, there's a successful startup, and that itself is not a bad thing. And also, again, the demand comes from the competitive, landscape, and the competitive landscape do not necessarily come from the free, economics. Sometimes, governmental issue or geopolitical issues kind of, come in, but again, startups are the kind of, entrepreneurs are kind of people who see the chance, when there's an opportunity. So that's kind of the, stance we have, as a university, based venture capitalist.
Thank you. So Guido, when you talk to startups, especially the physical AI or a bit of deep tech space, do you see they are more focused on dual use, or they're mostly focused on the problems that they would like to solve? Because dual use has been around in the U.S. for much longer than Japan, right? So do you see any trend, or do you see any insight? Do you have any insight on this?
Yeah, I'm not the expert in that area, so take this with a grain of salt. But I think in most cases, startups pick one or the other. So either they're working on defense technology, then they go all in that direction, or they work on a horizontal technology, and then they there might be some defense use, but it's not something they cater to specifically. And it's probably not the first customer, because selling to the Department of Defense in the United States is still very complex compared to selling to a modern software company or something like that. I was trying to think if we have any startups that sort of have both a large specialized government business and a civil business. And there may be a few examples like SpaceX, but I think it's relatively few, right? It's the majority of them is really either or.
Great, thank you so much. So we already have 4 minutes, so we'll move to the concluding section. And so I wanted to have each of you comment on the potential like a decacorn or unicorn coming out of Japan. And I was just looking at the top 20 highest market valued company in Japan. And then those are dominated by manufacturing companies like Jingo-san said, right? Like Sony, Keyence, all those companies. So I'm pretty optimistic. And then those companies are actually were startups 80 years ago, right around the World War II, the end of it. So I'm optimistic, and I hope that Japan still can produce decacorn and the world-class companies from now, right? But with that, so it doesn't have to be hardware or physical AI. But if you have any concluding remarks, just touching upon potentials of Japanese companies or startups, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, very quick. Yeah, so again, over the past few years, maybe since last year, things have changed dramatically in terms of the, environment around startup entrepreneurs. They're more exposed to, global accelerator programs, venture capitalists, and so I'm pretty optimistic about, entrepreneurs because they have been widening up their, visions, for growth, and the government is pushing that as well. So yeah, generally pretty optimistic about the Japanese entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I don't know if it's going to be hardware or software. I think maybe a combination of both. But the one thing I'm pretty sure about that is if there's a new unicorn coming in the next decade or two, it will have something to do with AI. We're in the age of AI. That is the big theme, and startups happen in big waves.
Yeah, well, definitely. Guido-san said that we are now living in the age of AI. So it's without AI, nothing can do that. So as a policymaker, well, of course, I really think about just how to deal with the AI, and also I think Japan is very, very friendly for AI. As we don't think much about the labor shortage. Right.
People here like robots. In the United States, more difficult.
We're not having such kind of Terminator, culture.
Exactly.
We love Doraemon and Tetsuo Atom. So we're really familiar with robot and with AI. So I think the good signal, the government, not only government but also startup, also have to send the message to globally, and we really would like to invite not only the money but also talent as well. I think Japan should be one of the best place with dealing with the AI. So that's I'm really confident.
Great. With great optimism, I think we just ran out of time. So please give the huge round of applause for the distinguished panelists. And this concludes this session. Thank you very much.